deep learning hands-on training using Python and Google Cloud Platform. I hope this section by our honorable guest, Mr. Sudhakar, would bring you a wonderful learning experience. He's working as a senior data scientist consultant at SAP, and prior to this, he worked as lead
Asha, your voice is not clear, right? Asha. Asha, are you there? Okay, sir. Coming back to our session, I would like to hand over to the session to the Sudhakar, sir. Please go ahead with your presentation.
Yes, sure. Maybe no, it's not allowing me to share my screen, so I'm
No,
not
sir.
sure.
No, allowed, sir. I have made you.
Sorry, it could be a admin privilege problem at my end, in fact.
Okay.
Okay, just a second. Maybe I have to solve for this. It might take a couple of minutes. Here we go. So I think I can share my Google Chrome screen. Okay, so let me share my screen. So it's not allowing me, in fact.
I made you co-host, sir. You can.
Yes, but somehow it is not allowing me to share the screen. I don't know why. Okay. Okay, here we go. It is now allowing me.
Yes.
Can you see my screen?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. It is visible. Please go ahead.
So yeah. Before we get started, let me give a brief introduction about myself. So my name is Sudhakar. I've been working in analytics over 10 years. So my work varies from all levels of analytics, starting from say a descriptive analytics where we create dashboard to the predictive ones that we are working. And I've also done some recommendation where the prescriptive analytics comes into picture. So all these 12 years I've been working with analytics, particularly companies like Genpact. I started with Genpact, then I worked for Dell International Services, then worked for Flipkart for 4 years, then now with SAP. So has been the last 2.5 years as a senior data scientist. So here, my job is to make sure that you have a smooth transition from machine learning to deep learning. I hope I'm going with an assumption that people already know some machine learning. Is that assumption correct?
I think few are there, sir, but few are very new to this subject.
Okay. Okay. So in case you have any questions around machine learning, also you can definitely ask. So you can definitely raise answers and interrupt me in between. So I'm totally okay with that. With this brief introduction, I'll tell you, what is the content that I'm going to cover. So here, we are primarily going to deal with deep learning. So first, how are we going? How can we smoothly transition from machine learning to deep learning? Then we will do some hands-on coding exercise, and finally we will do a species or a flower recognition through deep learning. So it's some kind of a image embedding model that we are going to create. So I mean, these are all pretty much hands-on. So I won't expect you to code, since on a online platform, it is very difficult for anyone to follow the coding part or do it along with me. So therefore, I'll do from my part unilaterally. Then I can share the codes and the presentations with you. and then we can later go to your hostel room or your home or whichever place, and you can definitely work on that. So with that, let's get started. So anyone who can tell me what is the difference between machine learning and the deep learning? Can anyone answer that? What is machine learning? What is deep learning? Is there any difference between machine learning and deep learning?
In deep learning, you are using artificial neural networks, sir. Machine learning, you are using conventional statistical tools.
Mm-hmm. So the difference is the number of why it is called as deep learning. Machine learning, if the number of layers that we are using is only one, then it is a machine learning. In fact, deep learning is a subpart of machine learning. So it can be a shallow learning, it can be a deep learning. Shallow learning would be something like a regression model. If I'm just using, say, a simple linear model, simple linear regression is actually a machine learning model which has only one layer. Whereas if my machine learning model has multiple layers, maybe 3 or 4 layers, then it is called as a deep neural network, and that qualifies for deep learning. So that is the difference. And this lecture is broken down into 2 parts: theory or intuition, then hands-on coding. And this theory part is very, very vital. I'm saying very, very twice, because this will make or break your understanding of why we are doing something in a code. And it's very important for us to understand this theory and intuition. There is a lot of matrix algebra that is involved, which I'm not going to get too deep into it. However, I will be talking about some details of it, some intuition that you have to understand. You have to logically understand why I'm using, say, an activation function vis-a-vis, say, one activation function over the other, or why am I using layers, etc. So those things you have to understand. So for that, I will be giving you a little bit of a theory. And hands-on coding. So I said Google Cloud Platform. So basically, you can use Collaborate. Either you can use Collaborate or you can use your Jupyter notebook, which is already installed in your machine. So I guess you have Jupyter installed in your machine, right? Hello? So
yes, sir.
Yeah, okay. So basically, you install Anaconda, and in that you have either you can choose Spider or Jupyter, whichever works for you. So that is the platform, and I hope most of you have that with you. And we are going to use a package called as TensorFlow 2.0, which is built on Keras syntax. And in that, we are primarily going to talk about regression and classification. Since it's a 2-hour lecture, we will look at how can we use TensorFlow to build, say, regression or a classification model. Basically, once you know this, you can in fact do whatever that you want using that deep neural network that we are creating. So this is what we are going to do on a brief note. The theory topics are perceptron model to neural networks, activation functions, cost functions, feed-forward network, backpropagation. So these are the 5 key concepts that we are going to learn today. Perceptron model. So what do you think a perceptron model is? So when neural network, what are we even trying to do creating a neural network? We are basically trying to mimic a brain. And how many of you know how a brain works? It has neurons in it, right? Every neuron, and the dendrites are the connectors. So basically, these neurons are connected by these dendrites. So if I'm going to look at an object, and if that object is a car, that is actually not converted into a light, and then it passes through my eyes. So that is the input data set for me. Once it hits the eyes, then it will apply some kind of a function which will convert that light rays into some kind of an image. What I see will be different from what say a snake sees. Snake maybe its activation function or the way it looks at the world would be very different from a human way of looking at it. There are some animals cannot recognize colors. There are some animals can only see in the night. There are some animals which have they cannot see at all, so they use just sonars, etc. So these are all basic ways. These are basically their own perceptron model that they have. The way I look at the car would be very different from how a dog looks at the car. Correct. So the way they, it's actually a function of the brain, and they are saying that one trivia. It's nothing to do with the deep neural network that we are talking here. The trivia would be what I see as color as red can be very different from how you perceive the red color. So there can be a difference. So that's why you can see in Facebook there are certain or what is that color identification games that they have, etc. So I mean those are all pretty interesting for us to see. Maybe everyone has a different perspective or different way of looking at it, different ways of processing information. So for the same input, my brain will be giving a different output. For the same input, your brain would be giving a different output. So this is what that biological neuron concept comes in. So that's how the perceptron works. And this perceptron is not just one. There will be multiple layers of perceptron that will be happening. First, it gets the image, then it converts into something, then that value will get converts into something, and then it converts into some kind of chemicals, and then it will be sent to the brain. Similarly, our deep neural network will get the inputs, say mathematical input. If I have to add two numbers, 5 and 6, so it will first get these two inputs, then process that. So addition. So that means I have to add these two numbers, and then it gives an output. So that's how a perceptron model would work. I'll just get into the details of a perceptron model so that you get a better understanding of it. Perceptron model. So the center, the circle that you see, right? So that is actually a model. So what happens to this model? I will give inputs. I can give multiple inputs or a single input, and I can get one output or more than one output based on the objective that I have. There are cases where I have to get multiple outputs. So one classic example would be if I'm going to look at a picture. Say, for example, I went to the Oscars and I'm seeing lots of celebrities. So what I do, I take multiple pictures of it. So what would be the output there? The output could be, there can be multiple outputs. So the outputs can be something like, okay, Tom Hanks and Tom Cruise are there in one picture. So there can be more than one output for that particular image. There can be an image where there is a huge group photo where Scarlett Johansson and Robert Downey, etc. So there are lots of celebrities are there, like 50 to 60 celebrities in a particular picture. So therefore, I can also get multiple outputs with a single photograph as an input, where it will convert that into, I mean, I won't say it's a single input. There will be multiple inputs, and basically a photograph will basically give a huge matrix input. I'll tell you, how it is getting converted, all those stuff. Okay, so that input will be converted into multiple outputs, so based on the shapes, etc. So this is an example of a multiple output model. Okay, so basically what a perceptron would be is, it will get an input, it will process that with a particular function, and then it will give an output. So which is exactly what a simplified brain would be. So dendrites will be receiving the inputs. So this is where it will be receiving the inputs. Then the nucleus will be the function. And then finally, axon will be giving the output. So this is a simple model. So till this, do you have any questions?
So I'm requesting a participant, do you have any questions or queries? I think there is no question,
Yeah.
sir. Let's go ahead, sir.
Okay, sure. So the key concepts that we need to learn in
Sorry,
a
can I ask a
perceptron model.
question?
Sure, go on.
No, why is it called as a perceptron?
Sorry?
Why is it called as perceptron? Very
Okay.
basic question though, I know, but anything anything on the basics of that, or just a name given?
No, perceptron would be how we are perceiving things, right? So it's so there is a reason for the name. Okay, honestly, I don't know the meaning of it. So basically, perceptron is an algorithm. Okay, so is that perceptron will convert your it will actually receive the inputs and it will turn that into an output. Okay, and for that they have given a name as perceptron, just how we perceive things. So that is the reason for the name. Okay.
Okay.
Key concepts to learn. There is one important key concept is activation function. Another is gradient descent. Third is backpropagation. So these are the points to be noted. Since I'll be sharing the slides, you don't need to worry in terms of taking these as notes. And finally, I will also give a nice toggle summary. So that will help you to revise it. So next time around, you need not go through the entire presentation. You just need to go through the Coggle flowchart. That will be good enough for you to refresh your memory. Okay. So let's get to know what each one of them would mean. Okay. So let's start with the perceptron model. Okay. So what perceptron model would do? It will get inputs and it will give outputs. So in machine learning terms, so what if that input would be like? Say I'm giving an example. I want to calculate BMI of a person. So what would be the X1 and X2 in this case? Body mass index. Sorry?
So weight and height.
Exactly. So X1 would be your weight. X2 would be your height. So both put together, then it will give an output. This is the simplest unit of a perceptron. And since it's just a single unit, it's easy for a human mind to calculate it. Okay, if someone gives me one height, one weight, I can easily calculate it. If there are 5,000 of them, it will take 5,000 data points. It will take a lot of time for human mind to calculate. So what I can do, I can just put it in an Excel sheet and do it. What if this has more than that? If I have to say predict weather, then I'll have say 50 inputs or 500 inputs. So at that time, even an Excel sheet cannot cut the bill. So therefore, we have to use a machine learning model that can in fact understand so many inputs. Okay, and this f of x is basically the BMI function. So what would be the BMI function? It is weight divided by square of height, I guess, right? That is the BMI function. Once that calculation is done, it will be given as an output. And we call that y as the output. So this is a simple example where we are just adding x1 and x2. Okay, so let's take a very simple example of say this is going to be a linear regression model. Okay, so this linear regression model, you have only two inputs, x1 and x2, and finally you are going to predict something. Say for example, there is a famous wine data set example is there, right? So depending upon the temperature and humidity, the number of years, which year it was harvested, the grape was harvested, etc., put together, you can in fact come up with the price of the wine made from that. Okay, so that is an example that I'm saying. So for x1 can be a temperature, x2 can be humidity. Only we are taking just 2 as input, and then we are putting it into a function. We are saying that it has to be multiplied by some kind of a weight, which is W1, and then some kind of a weight W2 on this x2. Say for example, the temperature. So x1 is temperature, x2 is humidity. And what is the weight that I will be giving? 0.5 is the weight I will be giving it to the 0.5 is the weightage that I will be giving it to, say, x1. 0.3 is something that I weightage that I give to x2. And then I'll just multiply and add them, and I'll say this will be the output. Okay, so this is what the price is going to be. So the first one, temperature affects my price by 0.5. Humidity affects it by 0.3. And finally, I will come up with an output price. Okay, so this is a simple perceptron model, but there can be a little more complication to it where they can even have a bias term. Say this is the bias term that I'm talking about, B. So when bias term comes into picture, so it won't be just the weights, right? It will also be the bias term. Say for example, if this value x1 is 0, so there is some reason for which there is a grape that it's impossible, but I'm just saying, say a grape is being harvested in a place where it is 0 degrees Celsius. So x1 will be 0, but it doesn't mean that the price is going to be 0. It will have some value there, correct? Even if the temperature is 0, still there will be some value to that wine that we made, right? So there will be a very, very basic minimal, say, commodity value for that wine would be given. So that is what this bias term would be. Another clearer example can be something of this sort. Say if there is a student is there and output is, I want to predict how much marks is he going to score in an examination, for example, mathematics examination. Okay, in that mathematics examination, x1 is the number of hours that he studied. x2 is the number of friends that he has. So if he doesn't study, just 0 hours of studying here, that doesn't mean he is going to score 0, because he would have listened to class, or he would have interacted with his friends and his friends would have told something and he would have remembered and he would have written in the examination. So therefore, even he has studied 0 hours for the examination, what he already knew will be the bias term. Okay, I hope I'm clear with the bias term definition.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now, for each term, you can actually give a bias. So for the first factor, you can have a bias. For the number of hours studied, there could be a bias. For the number of friends that he has, can have a bias term, etc. Bias is basically even nothing happens, even that variable is completely out of picture, or there is it is not even present for that particular data point, still there will be some value to it, basically a residual value to it. Okay, so that is what is a bias term. So another example that I can quote would be, say, cancellation charges, right? So cancellation charge is basically a bias term. So though my ticket charge can be something, XY, my ticket charge is say 500 rupees. In that 500 rupees will be based on the distance that I travel. But there will be a term called, say, 50 rupees would be the office charges. So basically, somebody is sitting there and he is working. So therefore, even if I'm going to say that I'm not going to travel any distance, I'm going to cancel my ticket, still there will be a charge that will be incurred. So that charge is the basic office keeping charges. So that is the bias term that we are talking about. Okay. And this can be generalized. We have till now we have seen only two values as inputs, x1 and x2. And in real life, we can have more than that, maybe 5,000 inputs or 6,000 inputs or more than that. So then what happens is we cannot be writing something like this. So if I have to write this as an equation, I hope you can still see the screen.
Yes, sir.
Are you? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. I'll just write an equation. Say, for example, for two of them, I can just write an equation. Say, let's call it as x1. So next to x3. So they have something like, so these are the W. I mean, they will have W1, W2, etc. These are the weights. Weights of each variable. So if I have to write an equation, that will look something like this: x1 star W1 plus x2 star W2 plus x3 star W3, and so on and so forth. It goes till 12. Okay. So instead of writing this entire thing, so tomorrow if I am going to have 5,000 data points, then I have to write a much longer equation. So therefore, we can do a simple generalization of it, because it's a mere repetition, right? So we can write something of this sort, where xi multiplied by wi plus bi. So that will be the bias term. So for the first data point, it will be x1 w1 plus b1. For the second variable, it will be x2 w2 b2. So this is the mathematical generalization of it. Okay. And this is what, I'll show you in how this is being done in a tensor. Tensor is basically a huge matrix algebra framework. So you can, in fact, I mean, at the end of the day, all these are a giant matrix algebra problem, right? You just have to solve matrix equations. That's all. So that I will show you a little later. For now, this is the generic generic notation of it. So this will have, say, for the first data point, it will be the first variable, it will be x1 w1 plus b1, and so on and so forth. So if I'm going to have n data points, it will go to, say, x1000 to whatever, x1000 w1000 plus b1000. So if we have just a single perceptron, that is not very useful for us to solve real life problems. Real life problems will have much more complicated ones. So therefore, we can in fact create multiple layers of it. Say if I'm going to stop with only one layer, it will become a simple regression problem. Say for example, in the previous equation, right? I can show you. So if I'm going to stop here with only one function, so one input layer, only this is the layer that I'm going to use. Then this layer will decide what is the output. Then it is just a machine learning model, right? Because I have weights and biases for only one layer. I'm not going any further fine tuning of it. So therefore it becomes a single layer. Okay. But in real life, we can in fact go a little bit more. We can connect multiple layers. So then it will become a multi-layer perceptron. So in this case, what you can see is I'm just giving 3 inputs. That 3 inputs is being crushed into 2 outputs. So this is called as what is that? You can in fact leave out the number of nodes. So these are basically every variable is considered to be a node. Okay. So I'm giving, say, height, weight, skin complexion, etc. for example, I'm just trying to predict something in a completely different, maybe his a person's how much of money does a person earn. For that, I'm just giving some 3 random inputs, and then I'm trying to find out his income levels. So in this case, what happens is, it takes the input, then it does some manipulation, which is basically the function that it applies on it, activation function, and then again, it forms into another layer where it in fact expands it into say three nodes, and finally it converges into a single node. So here you see there are going to be 2 hidden layers, because this is the input layer. Here, once it applies the function, we don't know what it is trying to do, because it's all black box. Every time it tries to get the best possible model out of it. So therefore, we don't know what it is doing at this layer and this layer. So therefore, these 2 are called as hidden layers. And that's why they are called as deep neural network. Okay. And basically, we can specify what would be the number of nodes that we have to leave out. If you don't want to leave out nodes, then we can mention it as a dense layer. Okay. While coding, I'll tell you when we can mention how many nodes that we can take, how many nodes we can actually leave out, etc. So basically, we can tune our model. So based on the number of nodes, we can in fact, number of nodes, you can change the number of nodes, and you can in fact play around the accuracy of the model. In training data set, of course, more layers that you use, more nodes that you create, your model accuracy is going to be high, but that will be some kind of a overfitting. So we use a validation data set to make sure that we don't do an overfitting. So we get a good result in our validation data set, etc. And for that, we do some tuning. So I'll talk about that a little later. So basically, it's a multi-layer perceptron model, and that's how it looks. And every time, say, if this is the first input, okay, so once it forms the layer 1, okay, and I'm just calling this layer 1 as L1, and this layer will receive only this L1 as an input. It won't get this input. So it will completely forget this input. It will only take input from here. Okay. And again, this is the first layer as an input layer, and this is the output layer, and the rest of them are hidden layers. So this is something that I've already explained. So this is a neural network that I'm showing. So here you see only one hidden layer, but this is one hidden layer. Then it is a simple whatever, regression or a classification model, which is a simple machine learning model. Here we have like multiple hidden layers. So therefore, it is a deep neural network. So that is what that they are showing in this image. Okay, so let's move on to activation functions. So let's recall the example of how we have used the input values and the weight that we assign and the biases that we assign. Okay, so for that, in certain cases, we have to say offset the value. Let me show you something. Okay, so this is one of the activation function. So why do we use activation function? So what happens is, in many cases, we have a limited value that we want as an output. So in certain cases, we want output as zeros and ones. In certain cases, we want outputs between, say, a probabilistic value. Certain cases, we need a continuous number as output. So for for the deep learning to understand what we are looking at, what kind of value that we are looking at, we have to give a activation function. So what this activation function will do is, it will limit the values that we are getting. Say, for example, so the number of centimeters, the same wine example, temperature, rainfall, humidity, 3 inputs are coming. And these values can be anything. right? So the temperature can vary between say -5 degrees Celsius, and it can go up to say 45 degrees Celsius. Correct. So that's a huge variation of values. And again, similarly, rainfall can be, certain places can be zero rainfall could be there. There can be a case where the rainfall could be somewhere around what 40 centimeter rainfall. I mean, maybe I don't know whether is that possible. Maybe 20 centimeter rainfall or whatever it is, average rainfall. Okay, so something of that sort. You will get some number. So these numbers are a very huge range, and when we try to multiply it with say a weight and then a bias, and then we come up with a value, still you will get a value that can vary from 0 to infinity theoretically. Correct. So to avoid that problem, we use an activation function so that we constrain the value within a particular range. Maybe in certain cases we make it between 0 to 1, or we make it like 0 or 1. In this case, it's a step function. So we see that any value, so I'm getting value from 0 to 500. So any value that after multiplying wx plus b, whatever value that I'm getting. So if that value is less than 500, I will make it as 0. If the value is higher than 500, then I will just classify it as 1. So it is a simple if condition. In Excel sheet, we put an if condition, right? So it is something of that sort. So I just what the neural network will do, it will try to say put some weights to it. It will take the bias values, etc., and then it will come up with a value, and that value it will convert it into 0 or 1. This is what exactly we do in classification also, right? In classification, we change the probabilities into 0 or 1. So which is basically we are applying a activation function. Even before that, for getting the probability value, we use a likelihood function, right? We use log value, etc., and then we convert it between 0 and 1. What is that? That is also an activation function, basically. Okay. So activation functions, there are many activation functions that there. Okay. So the activation functions, which is very popular, you don't really need to know all the activation functions, but there are a couple of functions that I will say which are really, really important. One is ReLU, which is rectified linear unit. So ReLU, another is sigmoid. Okay, when you look at ReLU as a function, I'll just show the Wikipedia page for that. Oops. Okay, so these are the different activation functions that we have. So the rectified linear unit ReLU, right? So this is the function. So basically, till particular point, the value will become, say, I won't take negative values. So that is a rectified linear unit. Usually this is considered to be a very popular method, activation function, if I'm doing some kind of a regression model. So the value would vary between 0 to infinity. It can give you a value between 0 to infinity. If you want, you can also put an upper cap. Okay, so there is a way of putting an upper cap for it, and say that, okay, so I want value ranging between, say, 0 to 500 or 0 to 50,000. Okay, for example, if I'm going to predict something, say predict somebody's, say for example, a cricketer is looking very promising. So if I want to predict number of runs that he would score in his entire career, so at that time I might even put a, say, limiting value where it can vary from 0 to 30,000 or 0 to 40,000, because more than that it can be absurd. Okay. And the sigmoid function, so tan H is another function which is quite popular. It is particularly used in case of classification, where we want to give some kind of an yes or no kind of an answer. So this tan h will give you a value between -1 and +1. Okay, and it has a very smooth curve to it. So in ReLU, the problem is, suddenly it just jumps, right? I mean, linearly it jumps. But in tan h, it's very smooth. And again, you can also play around the parameter. You can, in fact, change the x value, the e power x value, right? You can change that, and still you can get a smoother transition of values. So that's another, say, benefit of it. Another is something called as a soft plus. Soft plus is again used in cases of regression, where you want to do regression, but you find ReLU to be a bit too drastic in terms of, say, giving away weights. Then you can, in fact, use, say, soft plus, which is much more smoother in case. And finally, I will show you the sigmoid. Sigmoid, and another one is softmax. So these two are really important. Yeah, this is sigmoid. So sigmoid is a case where you don't want to, so there is a region where you want to make sure those values don't go absurdly negative. In that case, we will be using this SILU, sigmoid linear unit. So that the negative values are taken, but in a very rare case. Okay, and then it smoothly increases. So that's where the sigmoid comes into picture. It is very, very helpful. It is very, very helpful when we want to do some kind of a multi-class classification. Multi-class classification would be, say, in image classification, you can find out, say, multiple images, say the celebrity classification. So if I'm going to find out 500 actors in, say, 50,000 pictures, so sigmoid function will come into handy for me. So I can use that activation function. And finally, there is something called as a softmax. I don't know whether they have mentioned softmax here. So basically, softmax is simple. Softmax is assigning probability where multiple classes will add up to 1. So that is what softmax. So I mean, these are certain things that are useful based on the objective of your classification or regression. Okay, so these are some of the examples of activation functions. So this is an example of how I mean, we can use a dynamic function. So this is more like a sigmoidal function, right? It has a very smooth, nice S-curve. It's like a logit kind of a curve that we are using. And this is the tan h that I was talking about, hyperbolic function. And this is the ReLU. And this is considered to be one of the most used activation function when it comes to regression. And it's quite robust, and most of the times it gives some good results. Okay. Okay, before we go to multi-class activation, I would like to ask, is there any questions at this point?
Yeah, participant, do you have any queries? Please ask. It seems it's a chart. Can you look at Sudhakar sir? Can you look at
Yeah.
chart box questions we have?
Which one? Chat. Okay. Where is the chat?
In below, sir. Below.
Or more?
Apo, you check it where it seems like security, participants, charts, screen share.
Oh yeah, here participants is there. Okay, more chats. Okay, fine. How to fix weight function value? Okay, can you? Okay, can you explain it specifically how to fix weight function value in the sense?
So I would like call upon Dr. M.N. Ishwarapan.
Okay.
Hello.
Yes, sir. So he has typed, let's say, results. Yeah, tell me, sir. Yeah. So okay, I'll take his questions. Dr. Ishwarappa's question: how to fix weight function value? Say for example, I mean, we don't need to fix weight function value. It will be done by the optimizer. So what I mean, we don't really need to go and actively say that, this is what the weight that we want to assign. So that is actually the work of the optimization algorithm. Usually we use an optimizer called as Adam optimizer, which I'll be talking about it a bit later. So once we apply that optimizer, what happens is it just goes and finds out, it is basically a trial and error. So what it does is it just tries multiple values and then finds out what is the best possible value for this model. So that's how it fixes the weight function value. It's really a very good question. So when we, I mean, when I touch that particular topic, I will go a bit detailed into it, Dr. Ishwarappa. So the next one is from Dr. Ram Prakash. What are the criteria for deciding the number of layers? Of course, the criteria would be the validation. What is the accuracy that we are getting in the validation data set? So like we said, we can just keep adding layers. In the training data set, more layers that we add, our results are going to be extremely good. Maybe we can even get a 99.9% or even 100% accuracy. Whereas in validation data set, beyond a particular point, if I'm adding say 2 layers, my accuracy is say 70% in the training data set, 55% in the validation data set. When I add 3 layers, it becomes say 75% in training data set. In say this one for validation data set, it becomes 65%. When I increase it to 4, my training will become say 77% accurate. My validation accuracy will drop. It will become 57%. So then what we will say is, okay, so no, we are supposed to stop with 3 hidden layers. If we go to the 4th one, it is basically overfitting for the training data, and validation, it is in fact working very badly. So that's the way we actually decide the number of layers. So when we code, I will take you through that fixing up of the number of layers. Okay. What are the challenges that we face to implement deep learning? Again, practically, it's more of a leadership kind of a question, I would say. Most of the leaders struggle in implementing deep learning is because of the quality of the data that they have. Most organizations don't have good data. So that is the reason why people adopting to deep learning becomes a problem. See, at the end of the day, whatever model that we create, right, garbage in, garbage out. So if we don't give good quality data, the model is going to be performing very bad. Even though if we tune it really well, etc., it will consistently perform badly. So that is the reason it becomes quite important for you to have good, clean data set or reliable data. Okay. ReLU for vanishing gradient of how many input? Can you explain this? What exactly? How many inputs in the sense? Is that in terms of the input variable that you're saying? Hello?
I think Siddhartha, sir, right?
Siddharth Shankaracharya.
Siddharth Shankaracharya. I would like to call upon Siddharth Shankaracharya, sir. Hello.
Hello, sir. Hello.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes,
Please go ahead.
Am I
Sir.
audible? Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Sir, I just want to know that ReLU for means it's for how many different types of parameter or input? That's any particular input is there, or n number of inputs can be there for vanishing the data?
It can be n number of inputs.
Okay, okay. So that will be
Okay.
in a, yes, sir. So just please explain it something more about that, sir, regarding that ReLU process.
Okay, ReLU. Okay, so when we go to, I have a slide. Maybe that would help you to understand. So activation function. So we use it at many points. Correct. So when hidden layers are there. So this is one example. Okay. So here, it is sigmoidal, but consider this as a ReLU kind of an activation function. Okay. So here we are using it, say, for multiple nodes. So therefore, it can be used for whatever n number of outputs we can actually use it.
Okay, sir. Got it. Got it. Thank you, sir.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
That's a really very good question, in fact. So most of us have questions in the coming slides, which is in fact really good. I mean, good that we are proceeding in the right direction. Okay. So let me continue with it. We have done with the activation function, and okay. So we have to start with multi-class activation. So multi-class activation function. So we are using, I mean, usually when it comes to binary classifications, our old, say, random forest method or something like, say, SVM models, etc., will be really, really helpful and handy. Correct? Yes, no, can't say. Usually classification, the XGBoost, AdaBoost that we use, they do the job for us. But when it comes to multi-class, they are somehow not the best. Correct? So therefore, what we can use is we are usually faced with two kinds of multi-class situation. So one is an exclusive multi-class, another is a non-exclusive. One is mutually exclusive classes. So anyone can come up with an example of what is a exclusive and what is a mutually exclusive class, because this is a very straightforward thing. So if you just think deeply, you'll know the answer, and I'm sure that every one of you would know the answer. Just that you have to read the name and figure that out. That's all. Hello?
Maybe classes like male, female, or buyer, non-buyer, like mutually exclusive.
Excellent. Excellent. So non-exclusive would be? Okay, you can also put that in the chat. Exclusive can say extraordinary. Maybe not. Okay. So I'll just give an example of non-exclusive. So non-exclusive would mean that, okay, sentiment analysis. Sentiment analysis, I think most of you would have done sentiment analysis, right? Sentiment analysis, we would say whether that particular whatever comment, particular comment, whether it is say what we can say, whether it is a positive comment or a negative comment. So when a comment is positive, then it cannot be negative. Yeah, go on. Hello.
You just carry on, sir. So small disturbance somewhere, some parts.
Oh, okay. Okay. So basically, there can be two classes of something. So where if a particular class takes a particular state, that means it cannot be in another state. So a classic example would be say sentiment analysis. A comment cannot be positive as well as negative at the same time. Okay, for example, say something like rich or poor. Okay, so this is a status where if somebody is classified as rich, they cannot be poor. If someone is classified as poor, cannot be rich. So that is exclusive classes. I think that example is someone has given. There can be a case where there can be multiple states. For example, a photograph. If I want to do a classification of say 5 classes that I have, so a photograph, my job is to find out whether the photograph consists of a monument, a human, an animal, a vehicle. Say fifth is something like maybe a mobile phone. So these are the 5 things that I have to find out in a particular photograph. If I'm going to find out there is a man in that photograph, that doesn't mean that other 4 things are not present. Correct? It can still have a mobile phone in it. It can still have a monument in it. It can still have a vehicle in it, etc. So therefore, that is called as a non-exclusive classes. So can someone come up with a non-exclusive classes example? So that, I couldn't come up with something quickly. Maybe someone who can be more creative and come up with it, so that maybe next time I can use that example.
Maybe you are looking at a tree or something. Maybe a tree might have dried leaves, or maybe almost dried or damaged leaves or complete leaves. So that is still a leaf.
Your voice is a little breaking a little bit. Can you tell me again?
I was just giving an example of, say, for example, in a farm, if you are looking at, say, trying to find out what kind of fruits are there, or maybe the fruit, maybe within, say, grapes, it's a grape vineyard, and the grape would be, some might be dried, some might be fresh, some might be green, some might be black. So it's a grape, but in different colors. Maybe it could be even leaves. Leaf could be dried leaf. It could be maybe say we are considering some. We said any other leaves that consumable vegetables like or leaves. So so leaves it is having infected with worms or something like that. So it is still a leaf, but with infected with worms. So that is another example of non-exclusive. Could be, I don't know.
Okay. Fair enough. So that's actually a good case of non-exclusive classes, where say in a particular case where a grape can be, say, a grape can have a combination of things. Maybe a dried grapes with a green leaf, or a dry leaf with a red color grape, etc. So likewise, there can be a non-exclusive states that can happen. Okay, so that's a good example of non-exclusive classes. Okay, so and mutually exclusive classes. So what happens is while coding, we will mention that number of outputs that we are looking for. So in case of multiple classes, and we have say 500 classes, we will mention that we are looking for 500 outputs. Okay, and for multiple classes, the only thing that we have to tell is the number of classes that we want. So that will decide the n. And in that there is a variation between exclusive and non-exclusive. In case of exclusive, we will be using something like, okay, I'll explain it here itself. In case of exclusive, we will use softmax function. So what softmax function will do is, it will create probability which will add up to 1. Whichever has the highest probability will be the classified one for the exclusive classes. For the non-exclusive classes, we will be using a sigmoid function. So the sigmoid function will throw up many probabilities, and if we add up the probability, it will be more than 1. Okay, so then whichever has a particular value, say for example, anything has a probability value more than 0.5, then it can be considered as an object. So I'll just give an example. So this is a mutually exclusive example. So this is a traffic light, red, green, or something like, say, color of an object. So the object is colored is colored in only one color. So it will be looking something like this. If it is red, it cannot be green, it cannot be blue. Similarly, data point 2, since it's colored in green, it cannot be red, it cannot be blue. Non-exclusive. Again, it can be data point 1 can belong to, say, 2 classes, A and B, and it might not belong to C, or it can belong to all 3 classes also. So this is an example. I'll show you the sigmoid function. Okay, so this is a non-exclusive class example where I will use sigmoid as an activation function. So it will give me value between 0 to 1 for each of the class. The same class, say class 1 can be 0.8, even class 2 can be 0.8. Okay, in that case, class 1 and class 2 are something that I can take. Say for example, class 1 is color of the grapes. Okay, whether it is red or green. Color of the leaf, whether it is ash or whether it is green in color or it looks ash gray. Then again, you know, color of the stem. That stem can look green or it can look brown. Okay, so these are the 3 classifications. Say first case, it can so happen that the grape looks red. So therefore, you will have a high probability saying that, okay, so the grape looks red. So therefore, the probability is high in this case. My leaf is not looking green in color. So therefore, I'm getting a lesser probability. If my leaf is going to be green, then I will get, say, 0.75 or 0.8 kind of a probability. Then I can say, yeah, your grapes are red in color and the leaves are green in color. So therefore, their probability values are higher. Okay, so this is an example of non-exclusive classes. And for exclusive classes, we use something called as a softmax function. Softmax function, though we will get the same example, I can actually, so you will get something like this. If you add up 3 classes, whatever the number of classes that we have, in this case, we have 3 classes, red, green, blue. What values are we getting? We are getting 0.1, 0.6, 0.3. When you add all 3 of them, it is 1. And there is always only one class that can be correct. So therefore, it is green in color and it is very less likely it is blue or red. Correct. So this is how softmax function will give you the output. And the final concept would be the cost functions. So we have already learned the weights and biases activation function. So now we are going for cost function and gradient descent. I think gradient descent is something that we have already learned, right? I think most of you would have learned gradient descent, if I'm not wrong. Yes, no, can't say. Where did we learn gradient descent? Sorry?
No, I know some basic of it. Sure.
Yeah. In regression, we would have learned gradient descent. So basically, the gradient descent is the function which actually optimizes it. So every time the weight is changed based on the gradient descent. So how it happens is I keep just changing the weights and the error term keeps coming down. So that's where whenever it goes to the most deepest point, then that will be the most optimal solution. So that is what gradient descent is all about. Correct? We are doing pretty much doing the same even in this Adam optimizer. And here, I'm just going to show you the cost function. So this is the cost function, which is very familiar to you. Does that ring a bell? I mean, this cost function is very familiar, right? Where did we see this cost function? This is the cost function of basically mean squared error regression. Okay, so this is a typical quadratic cost function that we get. So at the end of the day, what are we trying to do? So any regression or a classification model, what is our objective?
Minimize error.
So our objective is only one. We have to reduce the error. Correct? And how are we going to reduce the error? Basically, if it's a regression, there is a real value y of x, and here f of x would be the whatever linear regression equation that we have come up with, and then it will try to compare these two. It will take the squared error. Why are we taking squared error? If we there are two reasons for which we take squared error and not just the error term, because there would be negative values, there would be positive values. That is number one. We can also take mean absolute deviation. Okay, but in mean absolute deviation, the way it assigns, it actually gives penalty for a small mistake and big mistake is pretty much the same. Correct. If the prediction is say 500 is the right prediction, my model predicts it 499. So what would mean absolute deviation would be giving? My model prediction is say, so one model prediction says 499. Another model prediction says 495. So if I go for mean absolute prediction, maybe I can put it in an Excel sheet rather than writing in thin air. So why are we using squares? 495, 499, and the actual output that we are looking at is say 500. Okay, so this is the actual output that we are looking at. In case of MAD, which is mean absolute deviation, another is mean squared error. So what happens in mean squared error? Maybe I'll change this to. So what happens? So there is a negative value. So I will change this to absolute. Whereas in this case, I will be squaring it. Sorry. Correct. So this is what we will do in MSc. So basically what we do is, so the errors for say one or very small errors, it gives a penalty of just 1. Here also it gives 1. Whereas the penalty, when the error increases, it is linearly increasing. Whereas here it is increasing quadratically. So therefore, more errors that you make, it will penalize you more. Getting the point? So more you are away from the mistake. Say for example, if this is say 550, you will definitely see a huge difference. Correct? This particular point is being penalized more. Correct? More mistake you make, higher the penalty would be. It will be like growing a lot. So that is the reason why we are using MSE. Plus, it is also, since it's a quadratic equation, it has a minima. We can in fact find it's a concave function, right? As a concave or a convex function. So therefore, you can find a minima. Okay. So these are the reasons for which we are using a quadratic cost function. So now I can optimize it. I can in fact, how the cost function will work would be something like this. So this is how the cost function would act, right? So you try to plot an x square function in a graph. You will get something like u, correct? And our objective is to find which is the least point there. So that will be the best possible cost function. And whatever the w value that we are getting will be the ideal weight. Okay, so that's how the weights are decided by the optimizer. Okay, so again, I don't want to get into the derivation of this, but again, we all know that at the point of so in a concave or a convex function, the stationarity, the point at which the least point is where there will be a stationarity would be there. So at that point, if I differentiate that particular point, it will be 0. So dx by dy will be constant. So therefore, it will be 0. So that's why, you know, we that is the minimum, the least point that we can go and identify. So this is what the cost function that we are talking about. Okay, and the cost function that I'm showing, this is for a single variable. And since we will be having very too many variables, the cost function is going to be very complex. So we have to identify the global minimum of it. So if I'm going to say initiate from here, and this is the point I'm going to stop, then there is a point which is much lower than that. Correct? So therefore, global optimum cannot be found out that easily. So I have to jump through it. So basically, I have to do some kind of a trial and error where initiation has to start here, and then it has to go. Like 3 or 4 initiation points. Okay, so that I reach to this global optimum. Okay, any questions? If it's kind of confusing, just let me know. I can illustrate it further.
I think in chart box, sir, somewhere, what is mean of penalized something they post Prem Kumar.
Okay. Hello. Sorry, I got disconnected in between.
Yes, sir.
What is the meaning of penalized? Is it?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Penalized. The meaning of penalized would be so whenever we try to predict something and we are making a mistake, there has to be a penalty for it. So the way it works is whenever the prediction is wrong, it has to be penalized. That means, you know, we are putting a penalty on top of it. So that is what the penalized would mean. Okay. Say for example, if I have to predict 500 and say I'm predicting say 490, or else, you know, let's take a real life example. You're going to a financial advisor, and you're asking him to predict the stock price. The stock price is, I'm predicting it, the stock price is 450. Next day, the stock price, when you see it, is 400. Okay, there is another stock analyst. He has given a number which is like 410. The real value is 400. Okay, so therefore that the penalty for analyst 2 who has predicted much more closer will have a lesser penalty because his difference is only 10. He is very close to the real value. Whereas my prediction is say 50 rupees away from the real value. His prediction is 10 rupees away from the real value. So therefore, I will be getting very high penalty when compared to that person. Correct? Because his difference is only 10. My difference is 50. When I square it, when I square it, the penalty for the second analyst is going to be, if I square 10, it will be 100. If I square 50, it will become 2,500. It will be a very huge difference. Correct? So basically what a model has to do, it has to find out, it has to give reward, and it has to give penalty. These are two things. So it has to give a punishment or it has to give a reward. That's the way the model works, learns. Okay, how does the model know that correctly? How will it know? I have to give a reward or I have to give a penalty. So this is what we are trying to do here. If you predict it close to the real value, I will give you some kind of a penalty. Sorry, if you predict it well, I will give you a reward. If you don't predict it well, I will give a huge penalty for you. Bigger the gap, bigger the penalty I will give. So that's the way it works. Okay. Can you all see my screen?
No, sir.
Okay.
Yeah, now it is okay. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Now it is visible.
Okay, so this is the, so what I can do is I'll take you through briefly. We can just revise the concept and then we will jump into coding part of it so that it's easier. Okay. So first we talked about deep learning. Then we have the perceptron. The perceptron has concepts like say activation function. Then they have backpropagation. I didn't cover it because we didn't have much time for backpropagation, but I'll just briefly touch there. It has activation function. We talked about gradient descent. We talked about cost function. Okay. So perceptron is what? It's basically the single unit, the calculation unit is called as a perceptron. The single unit of calculation is called as perceptron. Activation function is where we decide what would be the range of values that we are getting. So for that, so based on the situation, we will be changing the activation function. Say if I want my output to be between 0 to 1, then I'll be using an activation function which limits my output value between 0 and 1. If I want it between say 0 to infinity, for that there is another activation function that I'll be using. Gradient descent is where I will use the optimization. So how to get the best possible model. So that is the optimizer part of it. Cost function. Cost function is basically how do I give the penalty for the model so that I come up with the best possible model. This basically goes as an input for the training part. Okay. And backpropagation. Backpropagation is basically the way the algorithm in fact adapts itself at each layer. So what happens is, so based on the previous layer, it will decide what would be the weight of what would be the weight change that I have to do in the next layer. So this is called as backpropagation. So this is achieved using partial derivative. So I mean, we don't really need to understand what a partial derivative is and what are they trying to do there. It will all be done by the optimizer. So basically, these are the nuts and bolts of how deep learning works. It just happens at multiple layers, and at each layer, the weights are played around. And finally, to give an output, it hits the activation layer and then gives the output. So that output is what the required format that we are looking for. Okay. And finally, the models that we are going to look at is, say, it can be mutually multi-class exclusive models or multi-class inclusive models, or even binary models also we can use deep learning. Okay. In certain cases, that binary classes can be an overkill, or based on the amount of data we have, we can in fact go for binary classes also. When you have a huge amount of data, I would recommend you to go for a deep learning more than a machine learning. Okay, so now let's get into the coding part of this entire thing. Okay, so this is something that I will share with you. Okay, so this is a typical classification exercise. So this can also be done with the usual machine model, but here we are trying to do it with a deep learning model using a TensorFlow. So can you all see my screen? Classification exercise solution. Hello? Can you all see the
Yes, sir.
data description?
Yes, sir.
Okay, yeah. So this is the data set that we have. So this is basically the census data set that we took from the United States. So here my idea is to find out whether somebody is making more than $50,000 a year. Yes or no kind of an answer. So it's a simple binary classification. Okay, for that, how am I going to, what are the input values that I'll be having? Age, working class, a number of people in education, then marital status, occupation, relationship, race, gender. So these are some of the values that we are taking it as an input. Using that as an input, we are trying to predict whether this person could have an income more than $50,000 or less than $50,000. Okay, the problem is very clear for us. So we are importing pandas. Why are we importing pandas, right? Why do we import pandas?
For data handling, data manipulation.
Correct. For basically any data frame manipulation, we use pandas. And since our data here is a CSV file, we are using pandas. Okay. Even otherwise, pandas is not more convenient. And I would also recommend when you are importing pandas, use NumPy as well. In certain cases, when we turn that into a matrix, we would require NumPy library to run operations. Okay. Then we load the census data. So this is what pd.read_csv. I think most of you are familiar with Python, right? So I don't need to get into the details of it. Basically, we are just seeing how the data looks like. We have age data, which is completely numbers. Then we have working class data. So there are multiple classes. It's a class kind of a data. State government, self-employed, not included, private. So these are the classes. And education is also a class kind of a data. Correct? So it's categorical data. I mean, class data in the sense categorical in nature. So we know that what is the categorical data, right? Then education is based on the number of years that they spend. Sorry, yeah. Yes, go on.
Sorry, I was just trying to explain. I thought it was a question. Okay, sorry, please go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah. I mean, you can explain it. It's not wrong. Yeah.
No, no. Like I heard that you're asking about what is categorical data. I'm just trying to explain.
Oh, for categorical data explanation, right?
Sorry. Please go ahead.
Okay, fine. Okay, so now I'm just taking the income bracket. So income bracket, we have a training data set. So we have information here. We will try to split this data set into train and test. Okay, and then we will try to come up with a model that predicts their income. So income bracket data is also there, and that we can find out by this unique code, where what are the values that are there. So basically, unique code, this unique function will basically tell what is the unique values that are there. For example, so marital status. If I want to know, say, what is the unique values that are available in, say, marital status, we can in fact find that out. See, these are the different states that are there. Okay. If you want, you can count. Count, we cannot use it. Okay, fine. So we can actually find out this. I think. Yeah. So we can use that len as a function, which will give me, say, seven different classes are there when it comes to marital statuses. So 7 different statuses are there. And this is the label fix. So this is basically an if condition. We are just giving zeros and ones as the value. So there are certain places where we have to fix the label. So whenever, so you can see that, right? So in income bracket, lesser than or equal to 50K, greater than 50K. Okay, already applied. So now we are changing that greater than 50K and lesser than 50K with zeros and ones. So that, so now when you see that income bracket value, if I just see the unique after applying, it becomes zeros and ones. So that's what we have done here in terms of, say, label fix, because our algorithm won't understand what is the what is the difference between say, greater than 50K, less than 50K. My code will not understand. So therefore, I have to change that into 0 and 1. Okay, getting the point? Okay, then we are using model selection module in sklearn, where we can break the data into train and test. So I've imported the particular function. And then I have separated the X data and X label and X data and Y labels. So usually when you have used programming language like R, you don't usually separate the data frame Y label separately and X label separately. But here in sklearn, we usually keep features separately and labels separately. So that way, it becomes really very flexible for us to use modeling. Whenever we can just call those two arrays, we can separately run a function on only the feature set, separately run a function on the label set, etc. So that is kind of convenient in this kind of a framework. So what it does is, basically it splits the data randomly into two pieces, which is train and test. Okay, and here we have mentioned the test size as 0.3. Anyone knows why what the test size here stands for? So basically, if I have 100 data points, 30% of the data points can be used for test. The rest 70% will be used for train. And anyone knows why do we use random state? So random state is basically used for reproducibility of results. Say, since we are randomly splitting the data into two, if I'm not going to use this random state, first time I run the code, the split would be something different. Second time I split the data, the splitting of the data set would be split in a completely different way. Okay, so do you want me to explain that, or it is known to you already? In case if you want me to explain, I can just explain it, or else we can proceed. Okay, someone has said clear. So yeah, I think we are good to go, right? Okay, fine. Let's go. And so if you want to know the column, you can just run this thing, but I don't think we would require to do it because we already know the data. We have already seen it here. So we are pretty much sure what are the kinds of columns that are there. But I would always recommend you to run this line as a good practice so that later if I want to copy and paste something, if I want to call a particular column, it will be quite useful. Then I do some kind of a feature engineering. So feature engineering is basically it's some kind of a data cleaning that I'm doing. Okay, so where I treat for different kinds of values. Say here I've given a categorical column like female, male and female. So in case there are some places where the methodology, some places it is small f and small capital F, etc. So those problems can be fixed. Then there are sometimes I have to bucket the data. Bucket the data in the sense, say occupation. Occupation, it's some kind of a, let's see how occupation here they have read it. Okay, hash bucket size 1000. Okay, so since these are values, we are bucketing it. Marital status, again, it is being hash bucketed. Just one second. So this hash bucketing is basically a memory place where we will try to store all the categorical values that we are having, categorical or categorical or even continuous values also we can use for hash bucketing so that it just stores into a particular memory. So we will always assign a memory bucket size. So for example, so in marital status, we are giving like hash bucket size of 1000. So up to 1000 different values it can pick. So this is the way of conveniently cleaning up the data. Okay. then we are separately taking the numeric column. So whenever we are using TensorFlow, we have to clearly mention which one is a categorical which is a categorical feature, which is a numeric feature. So that's what we are trying to do here in these two code blocks. So I've imported TensorFlow, and we are using an alias of TF. So that's what we have used even in the pandas case. Then we are hash bucketing the categorical value, and then we are making a numeric column where it specifically knows how to treat a particular column. So my TensorFlow must, the algorithms must understand how to treat each value as whether it as a number or a column. So which is something which is clear, I think. And then finally, we are assigning features. So this is a name that we are giving to those columns. So yeah, gender, occupation, marital status. Before that, these are the names which are there. We are again, requestioning it. We can change the way we can have the names. So it is not that a critical step. Just we are providing a list to it so that it can just go and refer. That's all. Now we are running the model. So for model running, we just need to give the feature data set and the output and what should be the batch size, and number of epochs is given to say default. Shuffle is equal to true is basically the randomization of sampling. So that's what in a shuffle. So batch size would be every time the operation or the training is conducted, it will take a small chunk of data and then it will run. It will take 100 data points, run the model, learn the weights. Again, it will take another 100 data points, learn the weights, and then it just keeps doing it iteratively. And number of epochs is basically if I'm going to have 1 lakh data points. So every batch size is say 100. It has to take 1000 batch size to complete 1 epoch. Okay, epoch is nothing but your training is completed for each data point. Taking each data points into consideration is considered to be an 1 epoch. If it runs each of the data points at least once, that is considered to be 1 epoch. If it says, there are cases where I want to run it multiple times. Maybe I want to run it like 20 epochs. So 20 epochs would be 20 times it will be running the data. Basically, it will be resampling it, sampling it say multiple times, 1000 into 20 times. So 20,000 times it will be sampling it. So then I'll be getting 20 epochs. Getting the idea? Or is it confusing? Hello? If you want, I can show that in Excel quickly. I think it's better I'll show it in an Excel. Okay. So these are my data points. Say, for example, let me go. Okay. It's limited to say 100. So I have 100 data points, 100 training data points. So every time I'm saying the batch size is 10. Okay, what happens is first it will take 10 samples. Okay, it takes first 10 numbers, samples it. Second time, it takes 10, samples it, so on and so forth. It just keeps sampling. It's the second time. Second time, when it takes the batch. First time it takes the batch. So likewise, it goes till say when it comes to 100. So this will be the batch number 10. Correct? Sorry. It will be the 10th batch for processing. Okay. When it completes this 10th batch, it will be called as 1 epoch. So it has gone through all the data points at least once. So therefore, it is considered to be one epoch. Then what it does is, again, it repeats the process. This time, it might do the first iteration for, say, this number. All the it will follow a different sampling method. Maybe it will do something like this. This kind of a sampling, where the batch one for the first time would be 1 to 10. Here, the batching for the second time would be 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, 11 till 19. Okay, so likewise, it will just keep sampling for each batch. So therefore, it will test it multiple times and then it will come up with a holistic model. That's how the, I mean, even in random forest, we do this, right? We do some kind of a bootstrapping. So similarly, it is some kind of a bootstrapping where it happens like multiple times. And one time it runs through the entire data, it is called as one epoch. When it does that second time, it is called as a second epoch, so on and so forth. You can mention the number of epochs. Maybe if it runs through the entire data 5 times, that's all I want. Or if it has to run through the data 50 times, that's what I want. So these are certain things that you can decide when you want to do a parameter tuning. So more epochs you train, more accuracy that you are going to get even in validation. But the question is whether I want to do so many epochs. Okay, I might decide to maybe doing more iteration or analyzing the data over and over again can have a limited impact on the model accuracy. Maybe say if I run it, say 50 epochs, I'm getting 95% as accuracy. If I'm going to run 5,000 epochs, 96% is the accuracy. For 1% accuracy, I have to do 450 more epochs, which is higher computing power. So I don't really need to do that. Okay. So these are certain decisions that we can take while we are running a model. Okay. So now let's run the model. And this code is something that will run only for TensorFlow 1. For TensorFlow 2, the particular syntax is different. So maybe you can find out the syntax for TensorFlow 2, and you can change the code accordingly. Okay. So now we are applying in TensorFlow, what model we are using? We are using linear classifier. So you can use any kind of classifier that you want. So when you just put TensorFlow.estimator and then you just need to do the tab, you get all the boosted trees, estimator, etc. DN and regressor. So all these models are here. So you can just get them. Okay. So I'm just choosing the linear classifier because that's what I've run it for. And steps would be 5,000 steps. And you can decide the steps, whatever number that you want. Okay, I've run the model. Model is getting trained, so you can see here. So until the step reaches 5,000, it will just keep running. And you can also make an early exit. So for early exit, you can mention that, so beyond, say my cost will decrease every time I run, right? So you can see the loss. Wait. No, 176. Okay, every time the loss would be will be decreasing. So therefore, you can also decide by the loss value that you are using, so that finally you get the best possible model. At some point of time, you might decide, okay, so this is the accuracy that is more than sufficient for me. So I don't really require a super duper accurate model. So I might what I need is a slightly faster one. Maybe I can go for a step size of just 500, and that is good enough for me. Okay, so these are certain things that you can decide later. Okay, now let's go on predict it. So now that I've run my model, so let me find out how well it is predicting my the input that I've given. So I'm running the prediction function, and then let's start this model.predict. So I'm just applying this on the prediction. So so this is where I'm giving the prediction function. So whatever that I've trained, I'm just giving it here. So it is running on the new data set, and then we are getting the predictions here. So these are the predictions. And again, these predictions are not interpretable. The reason being, we have done a lot of changes, right? So we have given the hash location, etc. So it changes everything into a 0, 1 kind of a value. Or if it is number, it would have applied some kind of a log number, etc. So therefore, this is something that we cannot even interpret it. Okay. But the final prediction we can find out. So there are the final prediction would be zeros and ones. So 0 would be what? 0 means his income is less than 50K. 1 means his income is greater than 50K. So for the top 10 values, there is only one guy who has income more than 50K according to the predictions that we made. So now we can make a classification report. So classification report is something which is very common, which we have done for any of the classification model where we want to find the confusion matrix or precision or recall. These are some of the values that we want to predict it. Correct? So our precision here is say 86%, recall is 92% for class 0. And our overall accuracy is how much it comes to 0.83%, which is good, right? And since it's a balanced data set, 83% accuracy is a very good model. Okay. Okay, so I'll stop here, and if you have any questions, I can address those. And then I'll show you how image embedding is done, and after that you can apply deep learning for that, and we can proceed, and then we can call it a day. Okay.
So I would like call upon all dear participants. Do you have any queries, please? Now time to ask question and answers, right? Hello. Hello.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm there.
Yeah. No. Asking participants.
Okay. I think someone in the chat has. If the data set is unbalanced, what should we take care? Okay, so that's a very good question. For unbalanced data set, we do something called as SMOT, synthetic. That's an oversampling method. So I forgot the abbreviation of SMOT. So basically, there are cases where your data set is not balanced. Balanced in the sense, unbalanced in the sense, say class, say in this case, people with 50K income and people with less than 50K income are almost in a 50-50, correct? But in real life, maybe a person with say more than 50K income would be only say 20%, and the people with less than 50K income is say 80%. So that's an imbalanced data set. So at that point of time, what we will do is we do something called as a SMOT sampling. SMOT sampling would be synthetically we will create the minority cases, where instead of giving an 80-20 kind of input, what it will do is even the base model will give an accuracy of 80%. So that is actually a very bad idea for making a model, because 80% so what the model will do, by default it will find out the majority class, and it will say that that is the correct answer. A classic example would be flagging frauds. Frauds will be 1%, right? Less than 1% of the data. So if I have to identify fraud, so my overall accuracy will be like 99%. But when it comes to identifying that 1%, it will again consider even the frauds as non-frauds. Still, the model's accuracy will be 99%, because it makes only 1% mistake, and those 1% are frauds. So that then your unbalanced data set, since it's an unbalanced data set, your accuracy will be good. You will be happy about it. But in reality, your precision and recall will be pretty bad. Correct? Because it doesn't classify that particular class 1 correctly. So even in this case, see, it is doing well for 0, whereas for 1 it is not up to the mark. Correct? So it is only predicting only 68% of the times correctly. It is picking this this particular class. I mean, if it predicts that this class is say with more than 50,000 as income, it was able to do only for 68% of the times, whereas it was able to do correctly 86% of the times for the other class. Okay, and when the other class becomes really important, I want to find out, say, what if my purpose is to find out who are all the people who are doing tax cheating? Then this class is going to be more important, right? The 68% is going to be more important. So therefore, it is something that we do to do some kind of a synthetic sampling to solve for it. And packages, yes. There is a package which is available. It is available in sklearn itself. There is a sklearn, yes. sklearn Smart itself is there. So you can just do a simple Google search, you must get it. It's pretty straightforward. So you just apply it, it will do the Smart sampling for you. It's just a one-line code for you. Okay. Okay.
I would like, Kalapa, is there any queries from participants? Okay, sir. Now coming to the conclusion, really, I would like to thank to today our resource person, Mr. Sudhakar, sir, from SAP Bengaluru. Really, it's very informative, sir. The enlightened and enriched knowledge regarding for that, how you just talked about the lecture, especially starting from how you machine learning language, deep learning, about tensors, flowchart 2.0, like you carry forward that how models, perceptron model, and also you talked about cost function. It's really, I think all the participants maybe learned something regarding for this concept, sir. I would like call upon FTP team member. Can I have a vote of thanks?
Am I audible, sir?
Yeah, yeah.
Good evening to all. I'm really grateful for having given the chance to extend a word of thanks to everyone present here. On behalf of the IAPM and FTP team, I would like to extend a special thanks to Mr. Sudhakar for his valuable time and all the information he shared with us. It was really a great and interesting section, sir. And I also like to express my endless gratitude to all the participants for making this section a wonderful learning experience. Thank you all.
Thank you, Asha. Thank you, sir. Sudhakar, sir. We have another coming programs. We have a call for you as a resource person, sir. Still, really, it's enjoyed all these sessions, especially for a afternoon session. I think maybe while seeing the participants having more and more questions, asking you to maybe clarify all these things, sir. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. And I want to tell you all the dear participants, tomorrow schedule as usual. First session going to be talked by solving agri-sector problems from Fazal Products. Going to be a resource person, Dr. Madhumita, Fazal Bengaluru. And I would say about tomorrow afternoon sessions going to be talked AI based near infrared spectroscopy for the analysis of food products and agri producer. Going to be talked from CSIR Chennai, Mr. Dr. Madan Kumar Lakshmanan. This is the schedule for tomorrow. I'm sure that don't miss it for this. Maybe one from industry, another one from National Institute. I think these two topics going to be very useful for you. And I would like to inform you one thing. Attendance, don't worry, guys who are in online, who are in Google Meet, like Google app, Zoom app. We are every day we are generating the attendance sheet and we are maintaining. And final day, Friday, it is going to be uploaded in Atal Academy portal. I just talked morning with the Atal resource person, Atal concerned person. He said that end of the fifth day, they are going to be enabling and we are updating that. And of course, we are going to be sharing feedback form and also whatever exam test in our WhatsApp group. You have to just attempt. Maybe it seems Friday itself. Is there any queries regarding for this attendance? Everything is fine. Hello.
So I have a query on the contents for the codes and the exercise data sets for today's
Hello.
session.
Hello. Tell me, sir. Hello.
Hello.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yeah, please, sir. Go ahead, sir.
Hello, sir. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Kishore, sir. Yes, sir.
Yeah. Sir, this is regarding the codes and the data sets that were used in the morning.
I'm sharing.
As well as
Nice.
afternoon.
I look forward. I have to apply this.
Because Satyananda, I'm just in the middle of a discussion. I mean, I'm just conveying my queries to Dr. Venugopal. So if you may allow me to complete.
Yes, sir. Satyananda, sir. Please, 1 minute, sir. We'll call to you. Kishore, sir. By evening, we are going to be sharing you, sir, all the material.
Okay.
Okay. Even
Thank you.
YouTube link also, sir. Sir, Satyananda, sir, you are asking something.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you to our esteemed speaker for the deliberation. And we are looking how we'll implement these things in our field. Because being an agricultural engineer, I am very much angry.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. But still, see, we constrain only towards
to see that all. Okay. We'll be in touch after this also.
Sure,
After
sir.
this, we will be in also touch so that we get a lot of information from your side.
Sure, sir. Definitely, sir. We'll have some.
All the best.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you for the organization. Nice part for the organization played by the organizers. And thank you for the esteemed speaker. Thank you very much. Have a nice day.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. And tomorrow we'll meet, sir. Thank you. I'm going to. Thank you very much.